So welcome everybody, thank you for attending. Today we're going to talk about magnetic and electric stimulation and treatment of optimization of brain functioning. We have a distinguished panel here today, and I'll just briefly introduce each one at the beginning and then give a more detailed introduction for each one of our panelists as they come up. We have with us today Maiques, who is the CEO of Neuroelectrics, and which is a company aiming to change the way we interact with the brain, developing innovative technologies to monitor and stimulate the brain and to help many patients in need. We also have Graham Moffatt, who leads health and neuroscience research and development at Intra-Axon, a world leader in consumer neurotechnology, and the maker of the Muse. And finally, we have the president and CEO of Neuronetics, Chris Thatcher, who leads the pioneer and innovator in transcranial magnetic stimulation therapy to treat major depression. Okay, do I have a, there we go. So, but first, I'm going to introduce myself. And since I don't have anybody to introduce me, I'm going to shamelessly do some self-promotion. So I'm a neurologist, a general neurologist. I've been in practice for 25 years, but I'm not your typical neurologist. I have been trained as a sleep specialist originally, as a clinical neurophysiologist, and I had particular interests in cognitive evoked potentials and quantitative EEG analysis, particularly as it applies to human behavior. This led me to the field of neuromodulation, which includes neurofeedback, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and other methods in which we can modulate the brain activity in a therapeutic way without the use of medications. And finally, I'm an educator. I'm a certified instructor for the board certification in quantitative EEG analysis and also in neurofeedback. But I perceive myself as a cognitive neurologist, a behavioral neurologist. And what does that really mean? That means that we believe that, or the foundation of our philosophy is that the brain is the seat of behavior. And therefore, if the brain is the seat of behavior, the brain is the seat of aberrant behavior. And probably the greatest example of this was Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage was a railroad worker in the 1850s. He had a terrible accident in which the tamping iron, which he's holding in his hand right now, he was tamping down gunpowder into a hole, and the gunpowder exploded, went off by accident, and drove the spike that he's holding through his skull, obliterating his frontal lobes. And as a result, Phineas Gage had a description of a behavioral change because of his brain damage, which included what we now call dysregulation of executive functioning, planning, organizing, thinking, emotional self-control, and that sort of thing. So this is an example of how dysfunction of regions of the brain result in alteration of behavior. And our current goal is to correct that aberrant physiology of the brain in a way that's therapeutic for our patients, or even in the sense of non-patient clients to optimize their brain function for peak performance. Most recently, I've gotten very interested in something that is now a hot topic, but I've been into the field for approximately 5 or 6 years, and that is a sport-related concussion. And I've developed a online program that's called XLNTbrain, XLNTbrain, and this program is an end-to-end solution for athletes and in minor athletes for their parents to prevent, detect, and assist in the recovery of a sport-related concussion injury. And this is a great opportunity for me to plug my book, which has just come out about 2 weeks ago, and it's called Concussionology, Redefining Concussion Management for All Levels. So that's it for my shameless self-promotion. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about brain physiology. So the brain is an electrochemical organ. And this phenomenon, the electro part of this phenomenon, has largely been ignored in medical science, and especially as it applies to therapeutic options. But we are now in the era, at the dawning of an age where we have more therapeutic options than just altering the chemistry of the brain. Now, the electrical physiology of the brain is necessary for the chemical balance of the brain. And the neurons, the brain cells, are little batteries that charge up and discharge, and that influences the balance of the chemistry of the brain. This results in a measurable electrical activity from the scalp of the brain. And we call that the EEG. Now, the EEG, or EEG technology, has been present in humans for less than 100 years. It was first described by Hans Berger in 1924 in humans, and he wasn't even investigating anything that had to do with medicine. He was trying to figure out how people are connected when they're not physically together. He was investigating the paranormal. And he was the first to describe the various frequencies that are used currently today in analysis of EEG activity, ranging from the very fast activity that we call beta activity, which is considered to be very alert and focused and attentive, to the slower rhythms of the brain, for instance, theta and delta activity, which is considered to be dysfunctional or inattentive or inefficient. Edgar Adrian in England further described the EEG in relationship to disorders, medical disorders like tumors and strokes and seizures. And so as a result, EEG became commercialized. And it was not long before EEGs were actually found in every hospital in the United States and later in the world. Walter Gray Walter did an interesting thing. He actually tried to map the electrical activity of the brain and to display the information through colored transistor tubes that would light up when different frequency bands of the EEG were present. And this led to the concept of brain mapping. Now, in the 1980s, the computer development had come to the point where computers were fast enough, small enough, and affordable enough to be available for more advanced EEG analysis to larger amounts of people. The access became available. And this resulted in our ability to start actually mapping the physiology of the brain. Once we started mapping the voltage of the brain, it became clear that we could actually develop normative databases. And these normative databases had a Gaussian distribution, bell curve distributions, for which we could actually then determine whether an EEG finding was normal or abnormal. And now we could map the statistics of the brain. And in fact, compare a single individual's brain to the norm to see whether there were particular areas of the brain that were dysfunctional. And this results in new frontiers with regards to EEG analysis, which now we can not only develop normative databases, we can develop databases of aberrant physiology of the brain. For instance, there are distinct differences and statistically significant differences between autistic spectrum disorder brain physiology and normal, or traumatic brain injury, or even intelligence and learning disabilities. So these actually offer a new frontier in EEG analysis in which we can start to use the EEG in a diagnostic fashion. But it goes beyond that, because now we have the ability to turn that around into a therapeutic option as well. And the one area that I'm particularly interested in is in neurofeedback. This is an operant conditioning of brain physiology. In other words, changing the brain physiology by rewarding certain activity and not rewarding other activity. This was originally developed, probably most commonly cited as the Barry Sturman cat experiments, in which he used a very sweet milk to reward cat brain physiology and change the physiology of the brain. And in fact, he noted that there were behavioral changes associated with that. And later, that these cats that were trained were actually resistant to having seizures. At first, frequency bands were rewarded or inhibited. Then later, as the QEEG analysis with the database comparisons were developed, then the therapies were driven by the analysis of the EEG. And then most recently, the databases are actually built into the therapeutic reward system so that you are constantly guiding the brain towards a more normal and more efficient state, almost like having GPS in your car. You have GPS for your brain. Brings us to other forms of treatment, including electric and magnetic stimulation. When we talk about electric stimulation, probably the earliest and perhaps in some situations the most barbaric was electroconvulsive therapy, which was discovered to be therapeutic for major depression, bipolar disorder, and the like. But what we found is that we don't need to use a sledgehammer to hammer in attack, and that we can alter brain physiology using direct current stimulation or alternating current stimulation. And this too can be guided by EEG technology, as Anna will be telling us shortly. And then there's magnetic stimulation. Magnetic stimulation basically revolves around the fact that if you have a magnetic field or an electrical current, this induces a magnetic field perpendicular to that electric current. And then if you have a moving magnetic field, that induces an electric field or electric current perpendicular to the magnetic field. And this current can actually alter the environment of the brain physiology, the brain cells, the neurons, to facilitate or inhibit their ability to do what they do, which is charge up and fire and recharge. Now, interestingly enough, when I was a resident at Georgetown, my mentor had actually purchased a device which stimulated the brain. And when you put the stimulator right over the motor cortex, which controlled the opposite side of the body, and stimulated it, then there would be jerking movements of the other side of the body. And we all thought that was really cool, you know. Little did we know that that would turn in 30 years later to be a therapeutic option for people with medically refractory depression. And so here we are as neurology residents, and we were the happiest residents in Georgetown. So there's high energy options, transcranial magnetic stimulation, which Chris will be telling us more about, and low energy transcranial magnetic stimulation, which are used to modify brain activity. Now I'm going to finish with a quick case study, and we'll get on with our other presenters. Well, this is a 10-year-old boy whose symptoms were first noticed in the second grade, with struggles with executive functioning, including easy distractibility, difficulty staying on task, difficulty with control of emotional outflow, all these frontal lobe kind of dysfunctions. And in addition to that, he did not sleep well. He had difficulty getting to sleep. He also had some problems staying asleep as well. And this is an example of what we call a QEEG, a brain map. And what we see here is, and I don't think you can see my pointer too well, but on the top row, the third map from the left shows excessive amounts of theta activity, which is the slow dysfunctional patterns of brain activity, and they're predominantly up in the frontal lobes, maybe a little bit lateralized to the right. In addition, the second one from the left on the top shows beta activity. Beta is your hyper-alert activity, and there's excess amounts of activity here. It's a typical finding for people with over-focused behavior, insomnia, or anxiety. After 20 sessions of neurofeedback therapy in which we inhibited that theta activity and rewarded the brain every time the theta activity was lower, you can see that the theta, which is the third from the left on the top row, has virtually disappeared. And the beta, which was much higher in the pre-treatment protocol. So this is a person who has had substantial brain physiology change with 20 sessions over a period of 3 months. He spent a total of 10 hours of training and now has substantially changed his brain. This is an example of three-dimensional imaging of the brain activity, the EEG. Right now we're looking at the beta activity, which is the fast, hyperactive, anxiety, insomnia kind of pattern. And then in addition to that, we're going to switch over to see the theta activity, which is the slow, dysfunctional patterns of brain activity, showing that in a global sense, his brain does not really operate. But you can see that beta activity up in the frontal lobes is excessive and intermittently over what we consider normal. Now this is real time, so this is real-time display of the EEG activity. You can see a lot of theta activity globally throughout the brain with this excessive amount of sleepy, inefficient, inattentive kind of brain activity. After 20 sessions of training, this is his beta activity. He really has almost none. He still has a little bit bursting through there, but for the most part, what you're seeing, the green is normal. Green is no change from the normative database. And then as soon as we can get to the theta activity, you'll see that there was a substantial reduction in the theta activity. Now, remember, this kid spent a total of 10 hours over the summer break training his brain and substantially changed the physiology of his brain to the point where it's performing better, peak performance, that sort of thing. We'll see the theta in just a second. There we go, going to theta. Sleepy, inattentive, inefficient patterns of brain activity, dramatically reduced in comparison to his original pre-treatment EEG. And that correlates with improvement of performance. And this is a focus test from the Brain Resource Company. And what you can see is the focus test divides brain function into 4 domains. The open circles are the baseline performance, and the closed circles are the performance after training. So you see a dramatic improvement in performance in the thinking and emotion markers. If you look at the more detail, you can see that in the left column, pre-treatment, there's a great deal of dysfunction. Green is good, actually superior performance, and there was substantial improvements in his performance on computer-assessed neurocognitive performance. So that's a little bit about what I do. This is the clinical perspective of how we use these technologies and bring these technologies together to optimize performance and treatment of the brain for not only for patients who have dysfunction in the brain, but also to optimize peak performance in the brain in people who would like to improve their brain performance. Next, I'd like to bring up Anna Maiques. As I mentioned, she's the CEO of Neuroelectrics, and this is a company that is developing innovative technologies to monitor and stimulate the brain and to help many patients in need. She was nominated by the IESE Business School as one of the most influential entrepreneurs under 40 in Spain, and received the EU Prize for Women Innovators from the European Commission in 2014. And she is one of the most inspiring 50 women in Europe. So Neuroelectrics recently received the Best Startup in Health in 2015 by Wired UK in an amazing event in London, and she spends her time between Barcelona and Boston. So I'd like you to welcome Anna Maiques.
Thank you. I have a speaker, right? Well, it's okay. So thanks for the invitation. I think I'm super happy to be here. Thanks to Henry, Linda, Liane for all the great work. I love the title Brain Futures, and I really believe that the future is its brain. So I'm very happy to be here. As you have seen these last 2 days, I think this is going to be the brain age, and I know many of the people that are here are coming because, you know, mental health, families and problems. So what I'm going to describe to you today is a technology that is coming, and it's innovative, and I think and I hope that it's going to help many patients in need. So let me share what Neuroelectrics is trying to do. So I'm glad Harry made the introduction, because now you know that the brain is electric, right? So we have been obsessed at the company at decoding your brain signals. Now that you're listening to me, your brain is emitting the signals, so we have been decoding them. But then one day we thought, if we understand what the brain signals mean, can we do something to change them? Can we do something to influence the brain? And that's where we came with the concept of brain stimulation, non-invasively. So the technology we have developed, and I'm going to show it to you, is this wireless. It looks like, I don't know if a pilot from the 60s, or a diving cap, or, you know, my mother always says I look terrible on it, but I said, that's my job, Mom, so, you know, that's what you get. So this is a wireless neoprene cap with electrodes that can record your brain activity. It's as big as it gets. So if you compare this to the pictures that Harry showed on the first electroencephalogram, so I think we are moving forward as we are doing in telecom with the new technologies. But at the same time, with these electrodes, I can not only monitor the brain, but also stimulate the brain. So I'm actually injecting currents into the brain with these electrodes non-invasively. So I wanted to do a real demo, but it's not possible for technical issues. So last night after dinner, I recorded my signal, so don't pay very close attention. But this is how my brain would look, my brain waves. I can move an accelerometer to see if you're moving, if this technology is home. My brain was upside down after dinner, but then I put it right. So, so these are my brain waves showed in real time by using this cap. And of course, you can see the spectrogram, how your alpha waves. So it's just a brain monitoring wireless tool. You can do neurofeedback, of course, selecting bands. But what I think is really fascinating is that in this case, if you suffer, for example, for a stroke, I can select a couple of electrodes to inject currents and excite that area of the brain that got damaged after the stroke to try to help the patient recover. And then I have a simulation of how the electric fields are getting into the brain, and I'm exciting precisely that particular area of the brain. But the technology is getting more sophisticated. So now, by using multiple electrodes and stimulating the brain at the same time, I can get much more focal. So this is an example on how these technologies are also evolving, trying to non-invasively get very focal into stimulating the brain. So many of you will ask, but you know, what is this useful for? I think that eventually the fact that you can monitor and stimulate the brain is going to help a lot in providing therapy. But I also believe in the power of home use. I think we should be transitioning into once you go to the doctor and you get a prescription and they see that the treatment is good, I think all these technologies should be moving home. And I hope that we can make this into a reality so that people can also receive much more treatment in their homes. So what is it useful for? So one of the things we are doing is using EEG as it has been described for biomarkers. So we had some support from the Michael J. Fox Foundation to analyze EEG from people that develop Parkinson's disease. So these technologies, I think that they can be very helpful in the future as early biomarkers, especially in the neurodegenerative domain. And we have some preliminary data that shows that this can happen, and now we have a 3-year study with the Michael J. Fox Foundation to fund this. But on the therapeutic side, we are CE mark in Europe for depression, post-stroke rehab, pain, and addictive disorders. I said that the fact that we are CE mark doesn't mean that this is being widely used in Europe. I can tell you that most of our clinicians in Europe are using this mainly for post-drug rehab, neuropathic pain, and depression is starting little by little. I think it's very challenging to put new technologies and new therapies into the system, and it takes time. So our company has been working a lot with the research community, then with the clinicians, and at the end we hope this will go to home. So in the US, unfortunately, we are not FDA approved yet, so we can only sell for research purposes, but I see here the guys from the FDA, but we are going to go towards FDA. So I hope that in as little possible time as we can help to push some of these applications in the clinical field in the US. So stay tuned, it will come, some patience, but it will come. I'm going to drive you some examples on how this is being used in Europe as a clinical practice. Here you see my team, but here you see a patient suffering from a spinal cord, neuropathic pain. She's in a wheelchair. So she's seeing a representation of her legs in movement, which is activating her motor cortex. And at the same time, we are injecting currents into that particular area of the brain, and that is taking away her pain for a period of time. So I do believe that electrical stimulation is not a magic technology. I do believe in the combination of stimulation with other technologies, like this one. So you get a visual stimulus, and I am enhancing that effect because I'm stimulating the brain. Or in this case, in post-stroke rehabilitation, maybe you suffer a stroke, you cannot move your arm, and you're doing some robotic therapy to recover. I'm injecting currents into the brain to help you recover faster. So I believe in the combination of active therapies and electrical stimulation as a way to enhance the effects of a therapy. So we are working in hospitals like Burke in White Plains or Spalding in Boston, helping to recover patients that suffer from a traumatic injury or post-stroke. Of course, we have here Adam, our great advisor. You heard him yesterday. I think he's really a game changer. The fact that you can use video games to treat diseases. But I think that the way he's looking at the combination of many technologies, video games, stimulation, EEG, is the brain future. I mean, it's the way forward in therapy. There is no single treatment that is going to help a population. It has to be a combination of treatments, and it has to be personalized. So for every pathology, for every person, the treatments will be different. I think that's where the future is going to be. We are very happy because in spite of not having FDA or regulatory approval in many countries, our technologies are being sold in more than 40 countries. So I can tell you people boosting brain research with these technologies all over the world, from Asia, Japan, Korea, Australia, research centers, best of the world, they are pushing. So I think that there is hope for all the families because these people are brilliant, they are doing excellent work, and it will translate into clinical. I don't have any doubt. Then talking about brain futures and escaping a bit from the health issue, I thought, well, how these technologies are going to change the future in general. And we did a project now, it's running in Barcelona, so we sonify EEG signals for children with cerebral palsy that cannot communicate. And actually, the results are pretty good. So on top of using brain signals for diagnostic and therapy, can we use them as a way of communication for a lot of people that cannot effectively communicate? I think that's a fascinating area of research. And if we take that a bit further, can someday humankind communicate brain to brain? So, because the title was Brain Futures, I thought I would end up with this slide. So we made an experiment with Harvard last year in which we had a guy in India and another in France. And for the first time, we were able to transmit information from the guy in India wearing one of our devices to the guy in France without any sensory information. It was a binary code of 1 and 0s in which if you would think with the EEG in a certain manner and then stimulate the guy in another, the information would flow between the two brains. So I leave it there because I do believe that the brain futures is much wider than what we are discussing in here. So that's why, again, I'm very thankful that Henry and the rest of the team put this agenda together. And, let's just brain change the world all together. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That was fascinating. Our next presenter is Graham Moffatt. He leads the health and neuroscience research and development at Intra-Axon, a world leader in consumer neurotechnology and the maker of the Muse, which is the brain sensing headband. Prior to joining Intra-Axon, he served as the managing editor of the Frontiers Journal series under the Nature Publishing Group, covering neuroscience, neurology, and psychiatry. Graham's experience also includes research engineering with CNRS in France and Neuroelectrics Medical, as well as clinical trial development in universities and the medical device sector. Graham?
Thank you. So thank you for this wonderful opportunity. I think that we've all been, certainly the speakers that I've spoken with have been incredibly impressed with the quality of the work that's been presented here at this conference. So I really appreciate your giving us the opportunity to come down here and speak to MHA Maryland. My name's Graham and I'm with Muse. Some of you may have heard of Muse. We call it the brain sensing headband, but in fact it's an EEG system just like the one that Harry spoke to you about. What I think one of the next step in the revolution that Harry outlined on where EEG has gone has been to make the technology accessible, low cost, and mobile. And that's what we've tried to do with Muse. So now why would you want to make this technology accessible, low cost, and mobile? Well, there are a lot of reasons. One of them is neurofeedback. Another one that we happened on when we were developing Muse, we discovered that a lot of people in our company were active meditation practitioners. And this includes most of our founders, some of our engineers. And it occurred to us that there was something we could do to help people get into meditation. Now, we're in the midst of a mindfulness revolution. The reason you'd want to get into meditation is that the health benefits of meditation, I think, are now well established. I know that when I was working in the publishing industry, in the scientific publishing industry, there would be more and more evidence coming across my desk that would say meditation is beneficial for treating depression. Meditation is beneficial for treating anxiety. Meditation is beneficial for building resiliency in long-term care. And the list goes on and on. It's really a profound shift, I think, and one of the challenges in deploying meditation within the healthcare system in both inpatient and outpatient contexts is how do you do it? How do you teach it? So this is the problem we tried to address with Muse. Meditation in healthcare is a significant challenge to deploy, but one of the main reasons you want to do it, in addition to all of the benefits to mental health and to brain resilience and to mental resilience, is that it significantly reduces the costs to the healthcare system. So there's this fantastic study that was just published last week by Herb Benson at the Benson Henry Institute at Harvard that shows us that When you deploy something that they call, in Partners Healthcare, the Relaxation Response Resiliency Program, which includes a mindfulness component, it can include yoga, it can include prayer, it can include positive psychology, but the core of this is really getting in touch with one's becoming mindful, learning to be more mindful. What they showed is that they can reduce the number of billable events in a year following this program by 43%. So from about 55 billable events per patient in a high-intensity patient group down to about 30. This has profound effects, not just in terms of improving quality of life, but freeing up resources within the healthcare system and making it more accessible so that there are more resources available for mental health and for other important interventions. So if you wanted to do an EEG in the past, and you wanted to use EEG to help you learn mindfulness, we're not the first intervention to come along that tried to use EEG to teach mindfulness, but we were the ones that really made it accessible with Muse. This is what EEG looks like when you go to a hospital and you have an EEG. And this is still true in a lot of cases in neurofeedback. It's quite challenging. The setup time is long. It's not something that someone can do at home. It's not a mobile technology. But you can take this and you can tie it to smartphones. And that's really where the revolution happens, is by offloading the processing and making it something highly mobile, it becomes accessible to many, many more people. This is something that you can take out of a hospital. You can use at home. You can use it on the road. You can use it. I have a couple of them here that you're welcome to try out in the demo zone. You can just pick them up and put them on your head. They're very easy and accessible to use. And one of the reasons you'd want to do that, of course, is so we know that in places where, like the Benson Henry Institute and where I'm from in Toronto, there are mindfulness programs in the healthcare system. The reason we deploy them is because we know that they build resilience and they help people get better whether or not they have a significant health challenge related to mental health or otherwise. I'll tell you a story of two people I know well. Both got cancer around the same time. One lived in Toronto, where I'm from, where I live rather, and was enrolled in a mindfulness program at the Princess Margaret Hospital, the big cancer center in Toronto, and had access to meditation teachers and to these resources that would allow him to really benefit from mindfulness and from this intervention. Another lived in North Bay, Ontario, which is about 5 hours outside of Toronto, and there are just no resources there. So this kind of intervention that we know is tremendously beneficial in speeding healing and improving quality of life is just not accessible outside of the major urban centers. And this is something that you can address with a technology like Muse. So this friend of mine who got cancer and lives far outside of Toronto, I sent a Muse to, and she has been using it on a daily basis. Now, of course, that's not a clinical trial, but this is important and positive anecdotal evidence, and this has led us to some of the science that we've started to do now with Muse. When you meditate, the hardest part of learning to do it right, the hardest part of learning it at all, is to know whether you're doing it right, to know whether you're getting that benefit, to know when your mind is wandering, and to be able to bring your focus of attention back to a calm and relaxed state, to experience that relaxation response. And the way that we've built this experience with Muse is by giving you real-time feedback, allowing you to hear your brain activity as the weather. So when you're calm, the weather is calm and you hear calm weather sounds, little birds will chirp nearby. When your mind wanders, the weather gets stormy and you experience this cue to bring you back to a focused and calm attention state. This is how you learn to meditate. The core skill of meditation and of mindfulness is learning to control your focus of attention. This is what we've tried to do with Muse, and I hope you'll come and try our demo in the demo section so that you can see how this works. And this allows you not only to get this real-time feedback, but also to track your progress and to improve rapidly and to see your data directly as to how you're doing. The feedback we receive on this is incredibly positive. So people say things like, I finally get meditation after trying for 5 years now. It makes my stress go away and it helps me feel better. I can sleep at night now like a real person. My mind doesn't race when I'm going to bed. I've been using Muse for 6 months now and I'm more productive at work. I've seen a tremendous improvement in my outlook. I'm traveling again. I've started to work out. My friends have noticed an improvement. And we see claims on our Amazon reviews and elsewhere that relate directly to clinical and medical conditions. I won't repeat them here because I know the FDA is here. The other thing that possibility that Muse opens up in as an important tool in mental health is that this allows us to ask questions in a way that we've never asked before. So we have collaborators at a number of universities around the world, and some of them at places like the University of Toronto have conducted experiments using Muse because of the versatility of the platform in numbers of subjects and participants that we've never been able to do before. So there's an example of the collective brain experiment on collective neurofeedback, in which Randy McIntosh's group at the University of Toronto ran 523 subjects over a course of 12 hours. And they saw an effect that said, we're seeing neurofeedback learning within 1 minute of engagement in this experience. And you can only see this with very, very large numbers of subjects. So the statistical power and the research power of tools like this, of Neuroelectrics, of ours, of Emotive, are really going to blow the doors open, I think, on a lot of new insights into mental health and new insights into brain function. Another important one is, this is a poster we just presented at the Society for Neuroscience on a small cohort of 6,000 subjects who participated in our research program. And we can see very, very significant and important insights about how the brain changes with age with very fine-grained resolution. We can see gender differences in frontal asymmetry. Frontal asymmetry we know is an important indicator of temperament and mood. And these are things that will have to be taken into consideration as we design more effective treatments for whether they're neurofeedback, whether they're neurostimulation. I think these are powerful insights that will allow us to really refine, as Anna said, our treatments to make them much more specific to the individual and to generalize them more with outward from large cohorts. So with that, I'll hand things back over to Harry. I don't want to keep you guys going for too much longer. I could talk all day. But I will say, I hope that you come and try out the Muse at the demo section. And for those of you interested in having one of your own, I've convinced our sales team to give us a discount code for up to 50 Muses. So the first 50 of you who go to our website and use a discount code, A Common Struggle, in honor of our good friend Patrick Kennedy, will receive a $50 discount and free shipping on the Muse. Thank you very much.